Pull on up a chair. You're at Camp Video Games, y'all.
Camp Video Games. That's where you are. Welcome. This is a podcast that discusses video games and video game adaptations. I am Junior Counselor Sean. And who's that fella?
Oh, hi, campers. I apologize for the lack of snacks in the cafeteria this week. I may have taken the entire camp budget and spent it on a one-to-one recreation of Delfino Plaza from Super Mario Sunshine. That is a 10-to-1 scale. You can go enjoy it. You can go look at it. That may or may not be relevant to why we're here today.
And who's that fella?
Who, me? Did I say I'm Camp Counselor Josh?
There he is.
I thought I did. I was too excited about my replica set that I built. Much like the creator of Welcome to Raccoon City that we're going to discuss today. Anyways, this is Camp Video Games, a podcast where we talk about video games and their adaptations to other media. Today we are talking about the Resident Evil film Welcome to Raccoon City.
2021, baby. It's a movie that was produced and officially licensed by Capcom.
It sure was produced.
I have a lot of positive reactions to this movie. As a big fan, if you haven't already, give a listen to our Resident Evil series. We worked our way through the 2002 remake of the first Resident Evil game, and then we watched The Keeper's Diary, which is a fan film that includes some of the talent from the original game, which is kind of an interesting little spin. We had a nice little discussion about that. And then most recently, we discussed the Resident Evil 2 remake. So you can hear all about our experiences with the series, but just to shorten it up, I'm a big fan of Resident Evil, and this movie was really highly anticipated, and it delivered on a lot of what I was hoping for out of a Resident Evil live action, but it also raises a lot of question marks.
Yeah, and me being the one along for the ride here who only really enjoyed my time with the Resident Evil 2 remake, we're just going to be blunt about it, didn't really find much to sing the praises of in this film, but I'll try where I can.
Okay, good. So, Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City. It's a mashup of the events of Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 kind of mashed together with a lot of weird little tinkerings inside the lore and characters that are included. So brief summary of what happens is there's a big evil corporation called Umbrella, and they made some monsters. Oopsie doopsie. They did a little East Palestine in Raccoon City. And then they nuke Raccoon City after some people try to escape.
They did a pretty big East
cannibal.
Palestine there.
They did a Chernobyl-sized East Palestine, which is even referenced in the movie. This
Somewhere between the two.
We'll get to some of the themes that this movie wants to really, we'll say explore, or hammer home. It's a somewhat faithful in certain aspects to the original series. And when we talk about what it means to adapt a video game into a film, usually that means what are we sacrificing? Well, how is this going to get lost in translation? How are we compressing this to something somewhat recognizable, but not as true as the original form? Yeah,
which I want to think of this as building off of our discussion about the fan film The Keeper's Diary, where I am openly grappling more and more as the person who usually just doesn't much care for adaptations to try to understand the reasons why I feel they fall short. Whereas I think there's a lot of my favorite movies are probably book adaptations.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That this one, it was it introduced new things to me that I realized are sort of aspects of adaptations that either do or don't work, or things where I thought it chose to be so faithful in this area, that it sacrificed so much of just everything regarding filmmaking in almost every other
Well,
area.
it's like translating a different language. If you're doing it
Yeah.
absolutely literally without any sort of, zhuzhing it up, like the syntax is going to be all wrong, and it's gonna read as a different sentence altogether if you were to do a
Yeah.
faithful one-for-one translation of a different language.
Yeah, there was just almost nothing in this movie enhanced the experience of the original Resident Evil 1 and 2 for me, if that makes
Well,
sense.
can you imagine
Or
watching this
even made it
movie without
interesting.
playing the games?
Um
Can you imagine what that will? Because there's so much that is just dependent on. Do you remember this from the game?
right, which is probably my number one critique,
Mm.
which was my top critique of the Keeper's Diary. If, as we say, remember when is the most boring form of conversation. I think I almost like have an animosity towards like people who are like fans of that specifically. I think I have like a couple of like specific friends in mind who
The good
like,
old days kinds of fellas.
like they talk about like every like Marvel movie that comes out and like how excited they were to see so and so and such, and I'm just like, who fucking cares? They're not saying anything. It's literally just to generate this conversation among you and your friends. Is the whole reason it exists. Like it sort of like plays to like making the lowest common denominator feel smart.
Sure, it's the artistic equivalent of gossip.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, did you hear so and so did so and so? Like, because what? Great conversations are about ideas, not about people.
Yeah.
In general.
Yeah. And we will talk about it maybe in more detail as we bring up some examples from the film, but there were a lot of things where they chose to make sure we kept this thing from the game, and that is like a sacrifice to storytelling or filmmaking.
Sure.
And like it's video games are just becoming a medium that's like transcending what you can do with just a book or just a film.
Sure.
That especially when we have like the Resident Evil 2 remake that is like unlike, I'm not saying it's necessarily better than like the best films, which I think we're 40 years out from that, like the best films that will ever be made at this point.
It's no La Dolce Vita.
I was just talking to Sean about watching Fellini movies right before we started recording. Like, we're never going to make movies like that again, unfortunately. Actually, as we're recording this, Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis just released this weekend to extremely mixed, leaning negative reviews, which was him sort of doing his thing where he's like, I'm just gonna throw all the money in the world at it, my own money, and I'm gonna make the movie I want to make. And it sounds like he may have missed. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. I might go tonight. I don't. Anyway,
It's an intrigue. Well, because it sounds like it's where you've got an auteur like Coppola, and he's basically, if with this movie, it sounds like he's giving the art scene one last chance, like with this big hurrah of a film, and just saying like, if this doesn't work, if this doesn't land, because I'm giving it all the resources and all of the right like kinds of like touches. If this doesn't work,
then it's
cinema is dead.
Then it's Welcome to Raccoon City all the way down.
Sure.
Of I get it. Remember?
Quit fucking reminiscing with me. Okay, Josh, who's the lead character of this movie?
Definitely Claire. Claire is the only one that you have any sort of character development to. That's more than just a trope. What's Claire's full name?
Claire Redfield.
Yeah. And in case somebody's listening to this for some reason without already being a fan of Resident Evil, is one of the two protagonists of Resident Evil 2. And the movie, I think you already mentioned, does like a sort of weird mishmash of Resident Evil 1 and 2's plots happening at the same time, which I think is a smart, potentially interesting idea.
What? Well,
but,
here's okay. Yeah. If I were to talk through like who Claire is in this movie, because I think I want to talk about this movie not with our typical let's try to go through scene by scene and go through it, because I've watched this movie. You asked me before we started recording if this was my first time watching it. I've watched this movie at least 18 times.
What? Go on.
I like video game adaptations, and sometimes because okay, if you were to say, Josh, how many times have you sat down to play Super Mario Brothers? You'd be like an uncountable amount of times.
Right.
Right. And like that's just what you are doing in your leisure time. And at certain points of my leisure time, instead of I'll before we started recording Camp Video Games, I would go months without playing video games at some points where it's just like I would just fall into this like rhythm where I'm either reading more or I'm watching way more movies or I'm just staring at a wall waiting and waiting.
Yeah.
And with Resident Evil Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, that came out in 2021, height of the pandemic. And the pandemic was another point where I regained my love of like video gaming in like a regimented form where I was like, oh no, I'm not going to just chaotically pick stuff up and play it. I'm going to play through games and give it the full treatment again. When this movie came out, I was ready to just have new Resident Evil in my life because at that point, 2021, we had already Resident Evil 7 came out in 2017, and then the Resident Evil 2 remake came out in 2019. Both of those required a PS4, which I didn't get until last year when I traded you vegetables for a PlayStation 4. You don't have to buy everything, folks. You can just barter with your pals if they're cool. But at that point, I didn't have any new Resident Evil in my life. And this movie comes out, and it's summarizing two games that are very important to me. Like, the first Resident Evil it's a watershed moment. Is that the right way of saying it? Water?
I'm
think,
sure.
Whatever.
I think
it's that
the message has been received.
That levee broke, and this, and thus came the flood of other survival horror games with the original Resident Evil 1996. Having the series kind of retold in a more faithful manner, because the Paul W.S. Anderson films, which this movie is made from the same company. Paul W.S. Anderson is even an executive producer of this film. So it's not an abandonment, or it is a reboot, though. It is a reboot of the Resident Evil series. It has nothing to do with the Mila Jovovich films. Yeah. Because those had very little to do with Resident Evil as a video game series.
I'm going to interrupt for like one quick second to note, I watched the trailer for the original Resident Evil with Mila Jovovich immediately after watching this.
Fun.
And I didn't watch the whole movie, but I was like, that looks like a infinitely more interesting film than what I just watched.
I have to wonder if you would enjoy those movies because you like dumb action. Like you like it
like
when
it looks like a good dumb like last breath of the 90s 80s action movie kind of thing, and then it ran as a series for so long. That's interesting to me. Whereas this is like just like, I don't know, took like the internet age video game fan. It was like, y'all like this slop, right?
Yeah, drink it up, piggies. Yes.
Anyway, sorry.
No, because this is made in the shadow of those films where those movies got horrible like audience feedback, but incredible box office sales. They made
they kept
billions of dollars
for a reason. I'm sure.
They kept making sequels,
Yeah.
And then Paul W.S. Anderson with Mila Jovovich went on to make a Monster Hunter movie, which is another Capcom product. Yeah. And like, so Capcom loves these movies. Like they know that they'll make some money. I didn't do my junior camp counselor diligence. I think it's because I didn't have enough snacks because of your gross misappropriation of camper
so sorry,
snacks.
Everybody.
But if I had
I will burn Delfino Plaza in a horrible effigy of some sort to apologize to the children.
All that candy is really flammable. But if I had some glucose in my system, maybe I would have checked the box office returns of this film. But I gotta assume it wasn't as killer as they hoped, just because the director / writer of Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, I think it's Johannes Roberts, was like chomping at the bit to make a sequel. And the film ends with some sequel bait.
Did you say you were unsure if it turned a profit?
I don't know how much money it made.
$25 million budget, $42 million box office. So, I mean, I don't know how much profit is necessary, to make something be deemed successful in the modern market. But
you got to wonder if that $25 million includes advertising, because that's where they really suffer. Is because usually if the budget of a film and then double it, and that's your advertising, because that's the only way to actually secure some ticket sales.
Yeah,
and this came at the time where movie theaters were a non-option for a lot of sane people.
That's actually a very good point. This is November of 2021.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to a movie theater.
I was waiting for it to come out on DVD, even though I am this movie's prime demographic. This movie was made for me.
Yeah. I don't think when COVID hit, I don't think I went back to a movie theater I don't know, to like late 2023,
Yeah.
mid 2023 ish.
It's when I saw Final Fantasy Advent
Oh,
Children.
really?
Yeah, that was my grand return to the theater.
Yeah, go check that episode out.
That was a fun one.
Yeah, we had fun with that. But
Oh,
anyway,
boy. Okay, so all of this is to say that like this movie had the rare chance to do a faithful interpretation of the events of Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2. First and foremost, this should have been two movies. Like I say this only because the way that, and I talk about the events of Resident Evil like with this type of like it actually happened to me, man.
Yeah.
Like no, but like the events of Resident Evil 1 happened in July. The events of Resident Evil 2 happened in September.
right.
And the whole point is that there's this chemical leak in the Spencer mansion, which then seeps its way into the people of Raccoon, and therefore the zombie apocalypse starts in full. Because what they're doing with Raccoon City in the movie Welcome to Raccoon City is they are treating it more of Flint, Michigan. They're making a Flint, Michigan parallel with Raccoon City, where this place is being poisoned slowly over time by the negligence of Umbrella, which is a mega corporation, the pharmaceutical company that started in Raccoon City, but in the movie they're moving towns. They're going to a more prosperous town, and as a result, they're leaving this dead town that has absolutely no commerce.
Yeah, and I think this brings up like one of the first, I think, issues with the film is the antagonist is supposed to be like the William Birkin character still, and we just don't get enough of that from him. Like he's just like also kind of like, oh shit, it's happening, I got to get out of here.
Yeah.
And then we get like towards the end of the movie, or like when he starts to transform, I think it's like a little before that, is when he starts obsessing about like, I need to defend my work. But like, you don't know what that means unless you played the 2 remake and read all of his emails.
That's right. and playing the original, you get a pretty great idea of what William Birkin's up to with Resident Evil 2. The 1998 Resident Evil 2 gives a full account of why William did what he did.
Okay, but either way,
I know what you mean.
There's an outside
that
text
context
required.
is absolutely needed. Yes. Again, I can't imagine watching this movie without playing the games. Parallel, the Silent Hill film with Sean Bean, a fantastic. Like, you don't really need to play the games to get the idea of what that movie is going for, which is, I mean, and you know, Silent Hill was Konami's response to Resident Evil in terms of survival horror, and that film came out around the same times as the Mila Jovovich films, and they actually captured the full experience. I've only played the first Silent Hill game, and it's incredible. It's incredibly spooky and kooky.
Yeah,
but they nailed it, and in a way that it was like they were nailing it in such a way that they were like saying this to Resident Evil filmmakers of the time of the early 2000s, like, no, this is how you like make a survival horror movie, because that's what they should be. But inevitably, the Paul W.S. Anderson films are horror at the very end and more action throughout. They are action films with horror aspects.
Yeah.
Welcome to Raccoon City does a lot right in terms of capturing the survival horror vibes.
They had some moments where I was like, I see what you did there, but it didn't work for me.
I have to admit, I have a bit of brain rot right now. I was watching the film, and there was a camera angle that's like up in the ceiling. It's like from the ceiling looking down. Right. And I was like, oh, it's a fixed camera angle, just like Resident Evil. I was like, no, that's called cinematography.
No, you're right. There's a couple times where they decided, let's put the camera exactly where it was in the game.
Yeah.
As like a wink. And I'm just like, God. Again, it's like so that the lowest common denominator.
I remember feel like, that.
I'm into cinema, you know, because I noticed this. So you're totally right. I don't know where you were ready to take it, but this might be a good point to maybe now go into like, what is it that the writer director did with this film to adapt so faithfully.
Oh, what they did right,
Yeah.
basically.
I'll say adapt faithfully.
Okay,
I
I know
won't
what you
say
mean.
right as a good film, but
Yeah.
I'll say faithfully adapted because I didn't much care for much of it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So the characters, the lead characters that we're gonna really be like talking about in this film would include Claire, Chris, brother and sister, the Redfield
Mhm.
kids, and then you've got Leon and Jill Valentine and Albert Wesker.
Mhm.
Um, those are the people who have the most time on screen, and then Chief Irons, ironically, has a very different role in this than he does in any
Wild.
other
Played
thing.
by Donald Logue,
Yes.
who I love from Grounded for Life.
That's it. I was like, he's a
Yes.
TV dad. Like, I know
Yeah,
he's a
that
TV
show's the
dad.
best. It was like that show and Malcolm in the Middle were like
Mhm.
the two shows like in the late 90s, early 2000s that were like, oh, what if we made a show that's about a family who isn't rich and the parents actually like each other, right?
Oh yeah, instead of like Married with Children, where the
And
parents
like,
hate each other.
yeah, and they like really well, yeah. Or I'm thinking more like your Everybody Loves Raymond's, that kind of like.
Yeah.
I loved those shows for that reason. But anyway, I love Donald Logue. He's also in
great.
a lot of SVU through the years. Yeah, so he's in that role, and you're right, plays extremely differently. At first, I was annoyed, and then there's a couple moments of it that I'll throw kudos at. But anyway,
So okay,
other things that they adapt.
the first and foremost, like I'll just refer to the director as Roberts. So Roberts decided they created this idea that Chris and Claire grew up in Raccoon City, and that they're like in the canon of the games, they are orphans in that their parents died both at a younger age, and like Chris became kind of the head of their family unit. But the idea that they are in the orphanage that you explore in the Resident Evil 2 remake is a little interesting, because basically it's implying that the reason Chris Redfield becomes a STARS member is through kind of the grooming of William Birkin, which is completely out of left field. It's an interesting idea, and like the idea that Roberts had, because he wrote and directed this.
Yeah,
And it's an interesting way to explore the like this dirty avenue of thought that Resident Evil 2 remake introduces with the orphanage idea, where they are funneling orphans into medical testing for Umbrella Corporation so that they can do viral research.
But isn't that canon to one of the games, or at a certain point in the series of games?
Well, in Resident Evil 2 remake, that's where they introduced it. But in Resident Evil 1 remake, so Lisa Trevor, that's the girl with the skin face masks that is popping up here and there.
Yeah.
She is the daughter of a man named Trevor, who designed the Spencer Mansion, and her family was kidnapped upon the completion of it so that no one would know the secrets of the mansion. I forget who did that in like history, but like that's a real thing. Like, you know, you have, it's like the Winchester house. You have somebody build this house with all these weird traps and random, like, you know, secret passageways, and then you kill the designer so that they can't, you know, so no one knows the secrets of it. So she gets kidnapped and experimented on. And you see her in the first scene of the movie where she creeps up into, because Chris and Claire, they're sleeping in their little bunk bed, and then this monster girl like decides to spook one of the kids.
Yeah,
basically
that only Claire can see for some reason,
because she's the only one that's fucking opening her eyes, man. She's the conspiracy theorist. That's right. That's what this movie does. They say the conspiracy theorist is right.
Yeah, maybe that's why it's the one character I gravitated to. Or I mean, they definitely do give her the most development.
Yeah,
but I love that kind of character.
And she's front and center in the advertising for it too.
Yeah. Anyway,
and I'm glad then that for our playthroughs, because Junior Counselor Josh played through Claire's campaign and a little bit of Leon's B campaign, but most of your context for Resident Evil will revolve around Claire's experience.
Yeah, she is the Resident Evil character I'm most attached to.
Yeah, and me too. And I've played through everything.
Yeah.
And she's my all-time favorite video game character. I like her way more than Lara Croft. Say that. But so this little girl, she gets kidnapped by the Umbrella Corporation back when they were developing the Spencer Mansion. This is happening years before the events of the movie. And they implant in Lisa Trevor so the progenitor virus, if I were to like remember what happens in Resident Evil 5, or they go to Africa and they find the flower that created the virus, that
Sure.
created the T and the G virus. It's called the progenitor virus that came from some beautiful flower that only comes in this one little secret grove. Resident Evil 5 is a very problematic game because you play as a white guy shooting a bunch of tribal Africans
Oh,
that are zombies, but also like mutant monsters, but they're like in full headgear and like headdresses and
my animated face on the YouTube channel does not reflect what my actual face is doing
Yeah.
right now.
But she gets implanted with what eventually becomes the virus that helps create the Nemesis monster, which is the stalker monster in Resident Evil 3. You've probably seen him. He's got like tentacles coming out of his arms. He looks like Mr. X from Resident Evil 2, the
Yeah.
fedora milady guy.
Yeah.
Except he's got like, he looks kind of like Pinhead mixed with I don't know, just like a rotting mutated face. But so she's the instance where it's like, okay, in 2002 they established that Umbrella is kidnapping kids and doing this type of research, but linking it with the orphanage is an interesting idea because, you know, orphans are the most vulnerable kids, the most vulnerable humans on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're at the good graces of a industry that is notorious for mishandling them or for altogether betraying the public trust and selling them into slavery. And like, there's actual, you know, irrefutable proof of like children's services like being complicit in human trafficking. And like, this movie's hitting on this, which is a weird kind of angle to take on a fun summer movie.
Yeah, the part that I'm trying to clarify if it's canon in another game. So, part of Claire's story is she in the movie, right? Is she ran away from the orphanage?
Yeah,
because she found out they were going to take her into the experiment, whatever. So there's a part in the movie where she and Leon come across some film of like these two weird kids that are like they're from some Resident Evil game.
Yes, those are the Ashford twins from Resident Evil Code Veronica.
Okay.
Which is getting a remake apparently.
And is that the game that establishes a lot of like, ooh, the orphanage did experiments on kids, or is that still not quite cohesive?
Yeah, no, that's they in the lore of Resident Evil, the Ashford twins are a part of an ultra wealthy family that's part of the big brass of Umbrella, and they were a part of some human like experimentation, but it's they are the ones doing the experiments. They are not orphans in this in the games, at least. The movie seemed to imply that the Ashford twins were a product of the orphanage, but that is not the case in game canon. I know.
Well, so I mean,
we are raking right now.
I will give them some kudos for like adapting that to explain Claire's like backstory and motivations and such.
Yeah.
But I was just, and now I'm going to sort of critique the actual product, like the work of making the film a little. Anyway, like that scene, it's already 1998 and it's like a reel-to-reel projector tape and they're watching it on the wall and it's like the most pristine 4K footage you've ever seen. Like,
yeah.
There's so much just like awful, like lack of attention to detail when it comes to just filmmaking that it feels like was sacrificed in favor of these like adaptation details. Again, back to like the remember when details that like the writer director wanted to get in there. And that I feel like is like that's sort of like the overall failure of the movie for me, that I'm like, oh, this is why I don't like this type of adaptation.
Sure. Well, there's so many wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Remember, yeah, as you've already pointed out, like there's too many things that require you having played the games to understand why they're showing this on screen.
But it's beyond that. Even it's like there's not even a reason to show it.
That's
and
true.
Put so much effort, like, So the other thing that they very faithfully adapted, you mentioned like a couple camera angles. Where again, I'm pretty sure he was like, yeah, we're gonna put the camera in the exact same spot as the game.
I'm not
And
surprised.
again, like the lowest common denominator idiot who fancies themselves smart will feel smart because they'll go, "Oh, I get what you did there." But like, so like they did that in like, "Oh, we're going to remake the front of the orphanage and we're going to put the camera in the exact same spot. We're going to light and color it the same." And they did that with like the entrance to the mansion, and you're like,
Absolutely.
"Yeah, that's what it looks like in the game." Like it doesn't enhance anything for me
Sure.
to see that happen.
Yeah.
And it feels like that's where all of the attention went to
You're
me.
not. You are not wrong. When the movie was in production, the stills of the mansion set, which was mostly just like green panels with a
Mhm.
couple of real set pieces in it, but like when they released, they're like, "Look, we're doing a one-for-one recreation of the mansion lobby," and like that is what drove the hype train. Like that's
Yeah.
because there's Resident Evil fans that all I want is an actual movie that shows what happens in the games and makes me feel the way that the games made me feel the first time I played it. Like that's what people want out of these movies.
Yeah.
And like that's like I think that they focused on that kind of approach to
Yeah.
filmmaking where it's more just like, look, see, we did it. We have faithfully recreated the product. And
Yeah,
that's the thing, it's
but
the product.
exactly, cuz you said I liked what you said about like, "Oh, people want to recreate the feeling." Recreating the product is recreating the feeling of nostalgia, but not the feelings of like horror, fear, anxiety, like claustrophobia,
Yeah.
like that you actually the actual feelings you felt playing the game. It doesn't recreate any of
It
those.
does. It does in the mansion while Chris is walking
With the
around.
stupid lighter scene, is that what you're gonna
Yes, yes. Before that lighter part comes and it's him and he's just
do?
like
Yeah.
getting attacked from all sides.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it shows it's one of the only scenes where zombies seem dangerous and they weren't just like things
Mhm.
to be shot. They were more like, oh shit, like it captured the true fear that you would feel because like I think when people talk about like, oh, what I would do if
Mhm.
zombies came in, I would just get my dad's shotgun and like do all these things. And like that's like with an understanding of the like, Night of the Living Dead zombies, the
Yeah.
shambling, slow, dim-witted walking ones, not these fast zombies that like are animalistic. And they like it captured that fear a little bit for me, but
Yeah.
it's not enough where I'd be like, you gotta see this movie.
But for me, it's like it doesn't do it in a way that's transcends the game because we talked about this when discussing, especially like the Resident Evil 2 remake, that what you get out of a video game that you can't do in a movie is that after the jump scare happens, like you're still in it. Like
Yes.
you're still your nervous system is still triggered because you're like, oh, I have to solve this. The character on the screen isn't
Yep.
going to solve it for me. And so like when you try to recreate that I've already experienced in a game in a more interesting way than the movie can do, and you try to recreate it shot for shot in a movie, I'm
Mhm.
like, eh, like whatever.
I want to use this as an opportunity to talk about what's like glaringly missing from this movie, um, which is certain characters in certain events that are essential to work. Like if Roberts wanted to make a sequel to this, I think he wanted to make a Code Veronica sequel specifically with that footage of the two blonde twins
Mhm.
killing the
That
dragonfly. And
beautiful 4K footage from
yeah,
the 80s.
it's it's pretty clear that that's where he was going with it because I mean this movie completely ignores and I I I don't want to assume like like malicious ignorance of the filmmaker, but like they seem to really only focus on like Claire's story
Mhm.
in terms of like I don't want to like throw shade, but like I have to wonder how much of the games this guy actually played. It and only because like they could have had plenty of people consulting telling, well, this needs to get included, this needs to get included. Oh, market research says that we need to include this and this and this. But like the familiarity with the events of like the the story of Resident Evil, like this even it's missing. I mean, from the Resident Evil 1 cast, it's missing Rebecca Chambers, which means there's no Resident Evil 0. It's missing Barry Burton, which means there's no Resident Evil Revelations. Um from Resident Evil 2, um gosh, I'm choking right now. From Resident Evil 2, we don't have Mr. X. We don't have the stalker monster coming throughout, which is an interesting, like, but justifiable in terms of like, hey, we got to make this movie and we can't include every single detail.
Isn't that the teaser at the end? Is it Wesker become?
No.
Who's Wesker become? Isn't that what I thought that was what they were teasing?
So in Code Veronica,
or he becomes some other guy.
They inject him with kind of like a super soldier serum where he's now going to the ending kind of makes me mad. Just like in terms of like, oh, now we're meeting Ada Wong, who is an incredibly important character to Resident Evil 2 from Leon's perspective.
And like me having I didn't even play the Ada Wong run. And when they go to this thing and I see this like Asian woman, I was like, I know they're going to have her basically like stare at the camera and go, my name is Ada Wong.
Wow.
Again, it's just like, God, how stupid am I?
Exactly. How stupid are you? No. So it in Raccoon City, things that are supposed to happen in Raccoon City before the nuclear detonation is okay. So we're missing Rebecca Chambers altogether, and her story is what happens in Resident Evil 0, which is a prequel to Resident Evil 1 that was released around the same time as the Resident Evil 1 remake, using the same engine. So they were just like, let's throw this slop on the GameCube, get our Nintendo sales going up, and they just completely cut her out. And she's like a fan favorite, Rebecca Chambers. And you didn't experience her because you played through Jill's campaign, for what you did play of Resident Evil 1. But completely absent. Barry's completely absent. Nemesis is completely absent because the events of Resident Evil 3 happen concurrently and after the events of Resident Evil 2. And that's Jill Valentine's story. And we see what happens to Jill in the movie, and there's absolutely no Nemesis. So we're just saying, okay, if there's a sequel, it's obviously not going to be Resident Evil Nemesis because they already destroyed Raccoon City and there was no stalker monsters at all. Missing in terms of, I think the actual character Annette Birkin is completely missing. Like in this movie,
I thought
we have Annette Birkin, but she's she's like oblivious. There's no point of reference to her being a scientist at all. She seems to just be a stay-at-home mother.
Like she's just a body for them to waste later.
Yes. And I thought her complex relationship with her daughter and her work and her husband at the center of this catastrophe that her family is responsible for is like such an interesting character arc that you could explore. But this movie just makes her like a Mrs. Cleaver. Like she's absolutely like, golly gee, we just need to take care of our little girl who's so special. Sherry is like, who's Sherry at this point? Like she's just like, oh, my dad happens to be Joseph Mengele.
And then but then they still have Sherry get rescued by the gang.
Get rescued by Chris, mostly.
I don't really care, like, she got rescued by Chris versus, but it's just like, there's no, like, character relationship behind the why of rescuing her. It's just like, oh, fuck, this kid happened to be in our survival situation. I guess we'll pull her along. Whereas, like, Claire had a lot more attachment to her and, like, seeing the way, like, the police chief Irons, like what he does to Sherry, and is like, oh, I have an invested interest in saving this child.
Absolutely.
Whereas here it's like, I don't know, there's just some hanger on. Let's just bring her along.
Chief Irons is just talking about how great Journey is, and like Steve Perry, what his voice does to a woman.
Yeah.
I don't understand the motivations. Although, okay, this is a relic of the past, but I would absolutely buy this movie's soundtrack.
Okay.
Josh is mad at me.
No, I am not mad. I'm just like, this raises something that was really interesting to me, where it felt like there's like maybe a push and pull that Roberts had between, I'm actually sort of interested in filmmaking, and making interesting looking scenes and whatever, and like, but also I love Resident Evil and I want to do all these did you see
Mhm.
moments, because like there's like I'm gonna stick with the music because I forget what the song is. There's a very bizarre needle drop moment where I think it's the trucker comes fully inflamed
Oh, yeah,
into
yeah.
the Raccoon City police station, and Leon, whose character just is
Leon is a
so,
complete
that character,
Chad.
if that actor was ever gonna have a career, it's over now after playing this
It's
character.
a humiliating role.
It's really bad.
Yeah.
So Leon's like just tuned out, listening to whatever the song is,
I'm blanking right now.
and I think like in a different movie that aesthetically was more like this moment where it's like the camera just tracking along the flaming man casually walking into the police station with whatever, I forget what the song was
Is it
playing.
love me, say that you love
No,
me?
maybe I don't remember, but that was like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
A full movie of this could be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then like another moment that happened is when Chief Irons tries to escape the city.
Right, with Any Way You Want It playing.
Any Way You Want It is playing. Like you can tell this guy. There's something about like thinking about a creative like needle drop moment like that activates his creative director brain in a way, like, because that was the only other like interesting scene and shot in the movie to me is Donald Logue is trying to escape, and this is like a very Sopranos thing, where
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah.
camera is in the passenger seat of his car the entire time.
I don't wanna do your dirty work.
But then like all this action's happening outside the car and the camera doesn't leave the passenger seat.
Yeah.
It could have, and if it was filmed the way the rest of the film was made, it would have cut away to like, I don't know, either something explicitly from the game or be like, look, these are the guys who are shooting at him,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but instead it just stays with him the whole time. And I was like, this is interesting. Again, it felt very ripped off from The Sopranos or like, I don't know.
A little bit of Children of Men. You remember that one shot? There's a single shot scene of a car that's just kind of out of control rolling down a hill while people are trying to like stop it to steal because I think that's the movie where there's like women aren't having babies anymore.
Yeah.
And this woman all of a sudden is pregnant and everybody wants a piece or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but like, yeah, it was just like this single shot scene of a car just like rolling downhill, and it's all from the fixed perspective inside the car. Very cinematic, incredible, like, but also like it's all about how you use it.
Yeah, I should also maybe more explicitly say it's like a very Scorsese thing.
Sure.
This is extremely like Scorsese, like the one shot I'm the passenger in the car of what's his name and like Goodfellas like running from the helicopters, you know. So it's like it's ripping off somebody else, but it's at least like interesting. It's not just like, oh, this is what a Marvel movie looks like, you know, the rest of the movie.
No, there is a flair in the creativity on screen.
Yeah, and it's like, why didn't you make the whole movie out of this?
Yeah,
and it's because all this time and attention and money and detail had to go to appeasing the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, I have to say, if the actor who plays Leon like were to be brought on,
the movie was made for that character, for guys like that.
Let's see, his name is Avan Yogia.
I was also sorry, finish that thought.
He plays like, you know, Leon in Welcome to Raccoon City is such a bumbling, like, I mean, he might as well be Don Knotts, like, you know, oh, we need to tell the sheriff. But if they were to make a film version of Resident Evil 4, where Leon is the sole protagonist, he plays like a super cop FBI agent who's rescuing the president's daughter from a cult. Like, that's not happening with Avan Yogia. Yeah. Like, because he's charming in his own, like, he's a very handsome, like, and he's a fine actor. Like, he played a bumbling doofus uh to his credit, but it's like it's about
It's pretty bad.
sometimes it's like jazz, sometimes it's about the roles you don't take.
Yeah. I was like, also, I was just gonna make like a side little joke. I almost like took to the internet to be like, uh, oh, what was the discourse around this movie? As we're deep in Gamergate 2.0, as we're recording this in 2024, because like Jill and Leon aren't white, that I was like, oh, this had to piss off the gamers.
I wonder. I am so far removed from like internet discourse. Like
Oh,
ever
good.
since I
Stay that way.
stopped,
Stay gold, pony boy.
I stopped using Twitter and I don't talk to people.
Yeah,
So
good.
I feel pretty good about my decision.
Oh, it's horrendous. Every new game that comes out, it's just like this stupid discourse about, is it woke or not? Do we need to boycott it?
Yeah.
And but then like on the other end, there's a certain degree of like people feel they need to defend shit just because those guys get mad.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's like, well, no, a shitty game could still be shitty. Like just because it has diversity doesn't mean it's good. You know,
Just because the new Star Wars had a female lead, like protagonist, doesn't mean they're good movies.
yeah. I mean, the second one's good, kind of, but anyway.
I think that was the last movie I saw in theaters before COVID. Was the
Last Jedi.
the Rise of Skywalker.
Last Jedi is the second one. Rise of Skywalker's the last one.
Yeah, that's the last one I
yeah.
saw in theaters.
Wow, what a piece of dog shit that was. Anyway,
I have not rewatched any of the new Star Wars stuff.
You don't need to.
I don't know if I've even watched any of the original Star Wars stuff since. I just feel like I've escaped a cult of my own, maybe.
Oh yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I do feel like I escaped the Star Wars cult.
Yeah, and like
got it out of my system young.
My
know?
condolences to any families that have been torn apart by this needless intergalactic battle, pitting father against son,
nerd against nerd.
Stench against stench.
Neck beard against acne face. Anyway.
If this movie got a sequel, and I don't think it is, I believe they're going to reboot the series again.
Why not?
I think
there's money to squeeze. There's a $20 million profit.
The main events of Resident Evil 1 are supremely glossed over. We don't see the original, we don't see any tyrants. We only see William Birkin's G mutation in terms of that. Like, I mean, they had such a chance to make one movie about one incident and then another if they got the funding to do the second one. But like, I think like this happened as a result of the director playing through like one or two of the scenarios and then was just like, yeah, this is tractable. I can pan for gold in this little river.
I think I disagree.
I haven't read anything about the director's like.
I haven't really either, but like I feel like I admire what he wanted to do of sort of trying to say like, what if they happened concurrently? Yeah. I admire that effort because I don't give a shit if there's more of these.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
I don't give a shit if like this piece of lore lines up or that, I'm like, can you take the elements? Can you take the stew of this series and make something interesting? And that's where I like admire the effort of like, oh, like you have the first game and the second game are tied together by this brother and sister. And like, what if it happens concurrently and I use that relationship, which he kind of fails at, but like he tries, as like, oh, they're both in danger and trying to survive this together. I thought that was interesting.
It's not a crime. They did nothing wrong, but I just disagree with their decisions.
Yeah. Like you would have rather it just focused on one game and then be open to that leading into like the next one.
Yes, I think it's like it's the jelly bean approach. Do you eat one jelly bean at a time or do you grab a handful and throw them all in your mouth? Because this is a mouthful of jelly beans. Whereas I like to parse them out and get the full flavor experience of each individual jelly bean's flavor. And Resident Evil 1 has its own contained story. You've got every side that you need to have a successful adaptation if you treat it with enough gravitas. And I don't think I think the only real representation that you get out of Resident Evil 1 in Welcome to Raccoon City is the inclusion of Lisa Trevor, Monster Girl, and the fact that they go to a mansion. And
they go to the mansion. They make sure
they
it's
go to
the mansion.
You're right. They go to the mansion and look, he's playing Moonlight Sonata on the piano,
Ugh.
which acts as a password to open the door. Like that's fine, and it works
Yeah.
as an interpretation
Oh,
of the
and
game, but not as an interesting movie.
most importantly, we see that first zombie
Oh my gosh,
reveal.
yeah. They had to do that. They
Which
had to do that.
this is also a good opportunity to note, like, I'm sorry, like the makeup effects in this are dog ass.
There's a
Like
lot of
they look
digital blood.
so bad. Like no one's being scared of these zombies. Like there's just like they truly look like people with bad, flat, overlit masks on.
Overlit specifically.
Yeah,
The lighting is atrocious on some of the monster effects. Josh, did you know that George Romero almost made a Resident Evil movie?
I'd watch
There's a
that.
whole script. Like he gave it the full treatment, and they decided to go with something very different with the Paul W.S. Anderson movies
Mm.
as a result. But George Romero could have made a Resident Evil movie. He did direct a Japanese only Resident Evil 2 commercial in the
Mhm.
late 90s, which was one of the first reasons I ever got on the internet was to watch that. Like it was such a big deal.
Yeah.
And like again, because I was seeing these characters
Uh-huh.
in live action form doing the things, and
Yeah.
it's like so compelling to me. And it could have been, but it
Uh-huh.
didn't happen.
Actually, that's like maybe what you just said, I think speaks well to like my critique of like that excitement of, oh, I actually can see these characters in real life live action that you had as a child in the 90s when there wasn't just this massive proliferation of this shit
Yeah.
is exciting, but it's 2021 when this movie came out. Like we've been oversaturated with that at this point. That's like being like, "Hey, here's the thing from the games." Like, yeah,
Yep.
like that excitement does not exist in me as a 30-something man who has now had 25, 30 years of movies being adapted or remake after remake after remaster of things getting better and better. It's like, no, we kind of like we already have Resident Evil 2 remake at home, right? Like-
Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. In terms of sources that they're drawing from in Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, there are even aspects taken directly from the novelizations that I don't think enough people are talking about because not that many people have read the novelizations of
or are
Resident Evil.
talking about this movie.
That's correct. But okay, so we'll remember in the police office scene when Chief Irons is yelling at the Stars members about like, hey, we got to get our shit together and fucking you fucking no go to Planet Hollywood and get their salad and like what like who. Okay, I'll have more to say about Chief Irons later, but Wesker is getting paged by an at that point unidentified source that's giving him
Mhm.
that's like says like he gets a page that says go it's about to happen, go to check your locker. In his locker he finds a PDF that has a strategy guide to Resident Evil.
Yeah.
Essentially it's got a map of the Spencer estate and like, oh, this key goes to this door. It's everything that you wish you had while playing Resident Evil. But that's taken directly from the novelization because the author S.D. Perry introduced a recurring character exclusive to the novels named Trent. And he's, spoiler for a 30-year-old book series, he's a part of Umbrella Brass, but he's trying to destroy it from the inside. So he is and he pops up in all of the novels in just a very limited way that doesn't truly impact it, but in the novels Trent gives Jill this same PDF, which is not a part of the games and it's only to the novels. And the fact that they included that tells me that, like, yeah, okay, maybe what I said about Roberts is wrong. Like, maybe Roberts is a true blue super fan of the Resident Evil series because, like, no one, no one's like demanding a in-depth review of the Resident Evil novelizations these
Mhm.
days, except for super fans. And I would believe that maybe he is using that as a information source. Inspiration source even. So I thought that was an interesting inclusion. The scene where Leon is first introduced, he's like waking up hungover in his hotel room,
Yeah.
and like that works fine in the sense that like he's already in Raccoon's in the games, like he's entering Raccoon City at the height of the outbreak as it's going in, and it's him like finding zombies, going like, "Oh wait, what the hell's going on in Raccoon? Like, it's my first day on the job."
Yeah.
In this one, it makes more sense that he's just like kind of like a schmuck of a rookie who's like barely doing a good job, and he's there because of nepotism. Because his backstory is that he shot his partner in the butt during a training mission.
Yeah.
And his dad got him a job because he's a big wig with the Force. Or
It's
something.
like I was joking to myself, like, well, shooting another cop, that's the only thing you can't shoot as a cop. And then it just occurred to me that just a week and a half ago, as we record this, the cops did the mass shooting on the subway in in New York City.
Oh yeah,
because somebody jumped a turnstile, and that guy shot another cop, and I guarantee he's not going to lose his job.
I mean, but like there was like $3 worth of tickets at stake there. Man.
I know you gotta
kill and end a life.
You need to end lives to get those $3 back.
And there's that sheriff who shot a judge in Kentucky. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, that was in Whitesburg, Kentucky. I was just talking about the flooding of Whitesburg right before we recorded. Anyways, what were we talking about with Raccoon City? Leon's character.
Leon gets introduced, and it's okay. So it starts. This is kind of like I felt like this was just some amateurish filmmaking. Any scene that starts with an alarm clock going off and someone waking up is always just like,
get it? Their life's hard.
It's so ham-fisted.
Yeah.
But he wakes up under a sheet and he's like a Halloween ghost.
Oh yeah, I was like, oh, I get it.
I'm like, that's not even foreshadowing because he doesn't die. It just seemed like, oh, and then this happens. It was kind of like,
get it? You're watching a horror film.
Some of the horror aspects do work in this movie.
But that was like a clear choice of like, it'll be cute that he looks like a Halloween ghost under a bed sheet.
It has absolutely no significance. And like, movies are expensive to make and they're really hard to make. And they require like so many levels of preparation that you have to assume that every decision has meaning behind it.
Yeah.
And in this case, they're like, hey, it's fun. Like, that's fine. But
I think just side note, since we mentioned the budget again, like $25 million is like a drop in the bucket compared to like what this movie's trying to go against. Because I think I've already mentioned like once or twice, it feels like they want this to feel like it's part of like the Marvel Disney machine.
Absolutely, with their ham-fisted close ending credit.
Those movies are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. This was $25 million.
Yeah, it's
a
cheapy.
fraction of what they're building those on.
It's a bargain.
Yeah. But like it feels like whether it was the writer director's choice or not, there's at least somebody in the room who was like poking that like it needs to have this type of beat to feel like a Marvel movie. It needs to have this beat to appeal to the Resident Evil fans. Which is like another added burden on top of a minimum budget. And this is me trying to like
give it the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's generous of you. I just see a lot of decisions that a lot of first-time filmmakers would be making, and that's not the case with Roberts. Roberts has directed quite a few things at this point. Bigger projects that like, at least got some cinema.
Yeah,
runs.
But I think that's where I'm like trying to give it some generosity. Is like some of that can come down to like, this is the time and budget we have. Let's just do this stupid ham-fisted like alarm clock scene to establish this character as whatever. But then they like do it 10 more times. So maybe I'm being too generous.
I don't know. This movie has no respect for Leon. Like Leon is a complete buffoon, and it's charming in the sense that the actor is charming, but it's not charming on paper.
That's where my generosity ends.
Let's see. Let's talk about Chief Irons. Let's talk about good old
Donald Logue.
Where's the D at the end of his name?
I don't know. Somebody fucked up. I think it's a very Irish thing.
Oh, that's
I don't know. Right. He's either Irish or Scottish, I believe.
So, Josh, how would you describe Chief Irons in Resident Evil 2 Remake?
One of the most terrifying depictions of a cop I've ever seen. Absolutely terrifying man.
Yes. Serial killer.
Yeah.
Necrophile, perhaps.
But like my experience of the game, and this is part of what I love about like games as a medium, is a lot of that was only alluded to for my experience, which is almost scarier than like picking up a piece of lore or an external text and seeing like Chief Irons is a serial killer,
Yeah.
like just these allusions that of things. Whereas this, he's uh like a self-serving guy,
Yeah.
but like not evil. W and yeah, I was very confused.
I think so as we see, like, first he just seems to be a salt of the earth Irish cop.
Yeah.
Like, he's
An
like,
old school, like, dirty Irish
Krasowski,
cop. Yeah.
get in my office.
Yeah.
But with Chief Irons, he is complicit in the orphanage trade because he knew about the secret passage to the Spencer estate through the orphanage. So we at least know that he's still a part of the Umbrella Conspiracy, which is the title of the first Resident Evil novelization.
Mhm.
And so we at least know that he's taken money from Umbrella and is also possibly complicit in child trafficking. So bad dude, but on stage, he's not a menacing tirading like monster. He's just like an overworked blue collar cop. And it's very interesting that first they cast who they cast for it.
Like, he's their top, probably the most expensive actor they hired.
He's
Definitely.
he's a delight.
Yeah.
I love what Donald Lowe.
Donald Logue or Donald Logue. I don't know how you pronounce his first name, but yeah, Donald Logue is how I've always said it.
Yeah, it's DONALLOGUE. Donald Logue. So Donald Logue is like, I mean, he's TV's dad for a while. Like he's like such a fun like presence on screen, but then when you talk about the source material that he's supposed to be like representing, it's like, what?
Yeah.
Like, like Chief Irons, like when we're introduced to him in Resident Evil 2, he has a child at gunpoint handcuff a woman while threatening to kill the woman so the child will do what he wants.
Yeah.
It's like, this is straight out of like the BTK playbook, like bind, torture, kill. Like he is a representation of like actual evil men.
Yeah.
And in this, he's just like taking a little money on the side and maybe like closing his eyes.
Just your classic dirtbag cop.
Just a piece of shit cop.
Yeah.
This is a normal cop.
Which I can respect that, but it's like I almost didn't need him. If
The
he
movie
wasn't
didn't
going to be,
need him.
yeah,
At all. They just had him, and like his relationship with the stars is completely different than what it is in terms of like the RPD is a separate unit from the stars unit. Blah blah blah. It's not important to anybody else, but there's just like some. It's not even inconsistencies. It's more just like they went down some avenues that just they didn't have. There's a lot of no outlets here where like you think you're turning down to a road, but then it's just a dead end.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like with Chief Irons, like he's fun on screen. I'm glad that he's a part of this movie. He made me laugh, and I didn't need that from what's on what's in the video games is like one of the scariest men I've ever seen in a video game. Like I wanted more of that. I wanted some like human malice. Everyone's so nice in this.
Yeah, this could have been a whole movie with Chief Irons as the antagonist.
Oof, that'd be great.
Would be could be a fascinating
if they just
sort of thriller.
remade Resident Evil 2 as a movie, perhaps.
Yeah, but like you could even do
side story,
multiple movies, like one that's just Chief Irons,
yeah,
one that's William Birkin. There's a lot packed in here.
Netflix had a chance to do this, but instead they made a non-canonical way in the future sequel to the Mila Jovovich stuff, which I watched the first episode and enjoyed certain parts of it, but I decided it's hard to get me in on TV shows.
Yeah.
It's hard to get me in front of a screen if I don't have a purpose there.
Yeah. Like I feel like Resident Evil, it still probably wouldn't be like for me, but I think you can make a decent product out of it if you gave it a sort of like the first 2 or 3 seasons of The Walking Dead treatment.
Absolutely.
Where there are these just like dark-hearted men amongst the like zombie apocalypse that are like the true antagonists that have like an arc of a few episodes that like a core team of characters overcomes. Like that.
Negan, the governor, like these,
Yeah.
like the antagonists that show, and that's what the point of all these movies and of the games. It's actually man who is most evil.
Yeah.
These zombies are just a product of man's evil.
Yeah. That could have worked instead of trying to cram it all into an hour and 40 minutes or whatever this was.
So speaking of man being the true heart of evil, let's talk about William Birkin, played by Neil McDonough.
Good old Neil.
I find he was a pretty good
Actually, he
casting
was.
decision for Birkin. Like he's got this like clinical like coldness to him that works for like who would be like the architect of the downfall of humanity. Like the only thing that I thought was a little a bit of a misfire was just his relationship with his family. Like it's an interesting like dichotomy that like, okay, in the games, like the Birkins, you know, William and Annette Birkin with their daughter Sherry, they are married to their work. They have no time for their daughter. Therefore, their daughter becomes this independent, you know, young woman who is also, you know, severely like, you know, kind of downtrodden from a life of neglect, which is a tragic character that like has legs that actually develops into like in the sequels, you know, past Resident Evil 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it's in 6. We get to see what Sherry is going through as a young woman after having the G virus implanted and then quote unquote cured. She's going through some stuff as a result. I've actually, to be fully transparent, I've never played Resident Evil 6. I just stopped playing it at 5.
Well, stop the recording. We don't have an expert on that anymore.
Okay, well, thank you for listening. Patreon.com/camp video games. No, but I never played Resident Evil 6. It got the lowest score I'd ever seen from the series. And it seemed to like, for some people, it was their favorite just because it was all action. It was like a big spectacle. I don't even know enough about it. I just
like
kind
leaning more towards like a FPS shooter than
more along that, or you know, and like Resident Evil does have room for that type of gameplay. Especially Resident Evil 4 is where they started getting heavy into like let's see, in Resident Evil 3 it was called the Mercenaries campaign, where you would do like a speed run to try to get the highest score by killing as many enemies in sequence as possible, and they've kept that as like an after you beat the first campaign, you can just play this mini game over and over again. Resident Evil 4 perfected it because they had all these different levels, and it's just an insanely fun way to like perfect your run basically. But I was not interested in that because I played Resident Evil 4 and 5 when they came out. 4 on the GameCube and 5 on the Xbox 360. And after 5, I was like, I don't know if I'm like a fan of where Resident Evil's heading right now, because it got more and more action oriented. And Resident Evil 5 was again a kind of hard to digest game where it was like I felt a lot of white guilt playing that game as a white man killing Africans in Africa.
Yeah,
it was a very strange experience that I felt a lot of people got like the wrong kind of pleasure.
Some people had too much fun with it.
Exactly. I would not accuse that game of being woke.
Yeah. That's at the top of the Gamergate 2.0 list of like best games of all time.
Yeah. You have no idea.
It's like the birth of a nation of video gaming.
Sure. Resident Evil 7, which came out
actually,
years
sorry,
after 6.
One more note. That would be Custer's Revenge.
Oh my god. Hot take. The Atari 2600 porno game where you
we don't need to say what it's about. Yeah.
A native person.
Anyway.
It's bad one. Real bad.
Oh, sorry. Back to business.
Resident Evil 7 was the true return to form for Resident Evil. Like that's where they, this was like a first person true horror game. I would love for you to play it at some point. It's disturbing. It's shocking. It is so challenging. I think I might have said this in a previous discussion. It's a mean game. Yep. Resident Evil 7 is a mean, cruel, like malicious, sadistic game that is just like such a unique experience. It's no Stardew Valley.
That's quite a sell for me. As somebody who I want to spend a lot more time in Stardew Valley than Resident Evil at this point in my life.
I am a haunted man, Josh.
I am not 17 years old anymore. Not that it's like I get why there's an appeal for these things for people, but it does me more harm than good to spend too much time in these spaces, I'll say.
Sure. Yeah. Well, luckily this is the end of our Resident Evil
Right.
discussion in terms of the series. Not the end of the episode, but we're gonna take a break and play some very lighthearted stuff next.
Right. What else we got going in the movie? There's okay, we'll talk about the I got two things I want to bring up.
Go for
One
it.
is that like it's 1998, right? And
All day, every day.
in the film it's 1998. And I didn't like notice that until Claire shows up at Chris's house
Yes.
and she has a tape, like a,
A
Super
VHS.
8 or a VHS sent to her by
Ben Bertolucci.
a guy she's been dialoguing with online, and maybe she mentions chat rooms or something. And
Yes,
Chris is like,
'cause there's-
what the hell is that?
There's the fun like
Yeah.
dating, because like this is the part of the film I honestly got some enjoyment out of, because not only would somebody in 1998 who's not thoroughly online, not only would they say what the hell's a chat room,
Yeah.
but some young viewer in 2021 would go, what the hell's a chat room?
Yeah. But so like that happens before we watch the tape, and the movie is so aesthetically just like not 1998 otherwise that I was like, I was kind of, it took me like my brain had to catch up
Yeah.
to like, wait, what? Why doesn't he know what the internet is? And then when she finally puts the tape in, I go, oh, it's supposed to be 1998. But again, it's just like this pristine 4K footage of this guy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not what a VHS tape would look like. So there's that was just like really taking me out of it throughout the
Sure.
movie. But then what I will give credit to is, of all the things that felt like period accurate, were because the film takes place over one night and they show the passage of time by literally doing a cut to black
It's like an
and
SVU.
title screen. There every time it popped up with and there's just like this tiny little like time written on the screen at
Yeah.
like 12 a.m. or whatever. I would just be like, hell yeah. Like, and that was like the one of the few things that felt like this feels like a legitimate artistic choice. I was just like, it's this nice, very like 90s understated serifed font pops up in dead silence for like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And I was like, that feels like an artistic choice. And then we go right back to this ham-fisted bullshit.
Well, and it works for the story too, because it's countdown to the
Yeah.
destruction of Raccoon at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was a great way of almost building tension, where it's like the clock's running out. We're not seeing a ticking clock, except
Yeah.
we're just seeing
the very
font.
Majora's Mask. Boom, boom.
Oh, I've never beat that
Morning of the third day or whatever it
one.
is.
Did you beat it?
Oh, it's yeah, that's a fantastic game.
I'm gonna do it again.
Getting through the hangups of the time reset is like it takes a few hours to click, but it's a fantastic game. Yeah. So just it was just like aesthetically like, oh, that's interesting every time it popped up.
Yeah.
But also close to this scene in Chris's house, I think it's shortly after, like Chris leaves to go to work, and that's when Claire runs into her first, like, I guess, infected who's changing. And the moment I just yell like, oh, fuck this at the movie is when they write itchy tasty on the window.
And then she yells it.
And then just yells it in her face. Itchy tasty! Itchy tasty! I was like, oh my God. They made this movie for the just dumbest morons on the planet. It's like, and especially coming off of the other fan film, where it's like I've now, every piece of media I've interacted with in this series has now tripled down on just something that was just clumsy writing in a game from the 90s.
Though, I mean, just to summarize, if you haven't listened to our other discussions, Itchy Tasty shows up in what's called The Keeper's Diary,
Yeah.
which is, there's a film made about it, but it's about Umbrella employee losing their mind after being exposed to the T virus as they turn into a zombie. And their last entry in the thing, after having some more like normal syntax sentences, it just devolves into Itchy Tasty.
So like in the first game, there's a element of like campy B movie, like haha, remember when they had that really bad Itchy Tasty line that I can respect from like a cult fan following.
Yeah.
But now in this 2021 film, it's like you're asking me to take that seriously.
It has no menace
and it's
to
so
it.
Fucking stupid.
That was a disappointing moment.
So hollow.
it loses, I mean, it misses the point of well, if I were to try to look at it from the director's chair, I would see, okay, we have this, they're obviously aware of the Keeper's Diary as a, concept in the game, not the fan film, but they have this little piece of info, or, it's lore building that you find throughout the game. And that one was, particularly impactful compared to the other ones, just because it's like a first person perspective of a person turning into a zombie.
Yeah.
In terms of like early video game horror fiction, you play the Elden series, and like you can read stories till your eyes fall out.
Right.
And it's all going to be extra spooky and like well written. But with this case, it was just, that's what we had at the time in 1996.
Yeah.
And it worked then, and it does not work now.
Yeah. And again, I'll add that there's a campiness to it in the original game, that it's doing that interesting lore building that we hadn't seen a lot of. But there's something about the juxtaposition of the silly writing that makes it this campy cult classic moment that when you ask me to take it seriously in 2021 is stupid. I already said that. But shoot, I forget there was something else I was going to add on to. Sorry for being redundant.
Well,
but
this scene, it's an important
say.
scene to discuss, especially if you want to like take this movie down a peg, because like they're taking direct lines from the video game, but reapplying them, because Claire's in Chris's house. Yeah. And that little deformed mutant boy like runs in and is hiding under the kitchen table, and Claire, and this is a direct like quote for quote from the game, except it's Claire talking to Sherry. Claire says to the little kid, "Do you need help?" And the kid says, "You need help." And then in the game, that's where you fight the first mutation form of William Birkin. Like the first time you fight, guy with the big eyeball arm. And in this case, it's then she gets attacked by this zombie mom.
Yeah. Who yells Itchy Tasty at her.
Itchy Tasty!
I remember what I was going to say. It's like every time a moment like this was in this movie, it felt less like a creative choice and more like the world's worst fan was just off set pointing a gun at the director's head. Being like, do the thing I want to see, Yeah. And there's just too much of that in this movie for me.
Sure. Fan service.
Yeah.
Lots of fan service. The story is like Claire's like coming into town to warn her brother. I guess it's like in the originally it's that like the phone lines are cut down in Raccoon City, and Claire can't get a hold of her brother and hasn't heard from him in months, because Resident Evil 1 happens in July, and then the STARS members basically like go into hiding because the whole town, like through like a misinformation campaign, the whole town thinks that the STARS members were like on drugs and crashed a helicopter because they were drunk driving, because Umbrella owns the newspaper and has, the chief of police in their pockets. And so like they're basically doing a complete cover up of what happens at the Spencer mansion. And so in those intervening months, like, things are just getting worse and worse. There's more and more random attacks out, in the streets at night. And then eventually, the events of Resident Evil 2 happen. And in this case, like, it's just like, it's a ghost town with barely anybody in it. Now that Umbrella is like moving to a different location, and they're all getting slowly sick at the same time. But like, this is a part where I had a little bit of a problem in terms of like, if I were to like dissect this movie and try to make sense of it, which is not a good idea, but is that, so for months at a time, like, cause the waitress, right? She starts like bleeding out of her eyeball.
Yeah.
And Leon's like, does that happen often?
Yeah, she's like,
"Yeah,
that's weird.
Yeah, she's like, it happens sometimes,
Yeah.
like, and it's they're making a point like, oh, she doesn't have health insurance, or like, there's no care, there's no facilities that can really handle this. But if everyone's getting sick, it's like, this is like in Flint, Michigan, everyone's getting sick from lead poisoning. But in Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, apparently they all die at the same time from the same poisoning. They like immediately all become zombies after the truck crashes.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it seems like there's no explanation of like how this slow burn can actually happen. And I thought it was an interesting idea that like, I think it's Ben Bertolucci, the guy that was talking to Claire in chat rooms. And he's a character that you meet in Resident Evil 2 through Leon's campaign. He's got a great death scene in the game. It's very fun. But in this case, he accuses like the STARS members and all the cops of being like secretly vaccinated against what's going on to everybody, which is another like, I mean, there's a lot of like conspiracy thought in this movie.
Yeah.
Specifically from Claire and Ben as characters. And he introduces this like paranoia almost of like I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, I'm afraid of like being secretly infected by something without knowing it. Like, being infected by
fluoride in the water
or styrene gas in the air.
Something that actually just happened.
Or what happened in East Palestine? What was the chemical there?
Oh, I don't remember what the chemical was, but yeah, I mean, lots of chemicals were dumped into the air, and overall, the government has sort of just been like, "It's fine, just
fine,
just
hold your breath as much as possible." But so these people getting secretly like diseased, it's like that's its own freak out. Like, I'm a hypochondriac. Like, oh shit, like But then on the opposite side, of just being like, wait, they gave me a vaccine without me knowing it. Like, that's another like side of it. And I mean, there's a lot of real world parallels that could be taken with this, where it's just like,
oh yeah, dude,
the best ways to just get completely delisted.
Folks, what you're gonna want to do is don't get the vaccine. What you're gonna need to do is buy my brain pills, Alpha Extreme Energy. You're gonna go onto the website. They're $50 a bottle. You get 20 pills a week. Anyway,
throw my tactical toaster into my tactical bathtub.
This is that kind of podcast now,
folks.
Yeah, I don't know. I did find that semi interesting.
Yeah, that is an interesting idea that is not like at all explored in the games, but like it makes sense for this interpretation of the events of Raccoon City. Like, that's the way I would put it. Like, you say like, a lot of your favorite films are, like, could be based on books, but like, we view Stephen King's The Shining very differently than we view Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Same source material being Stephen King's The Shining. But like, what happens in Stanley Kubrick's film is its own universe. It has its own complete like set of logic, and like it's all coming from the Delta, but it's its own tributary.
Yeah.
And I see this the same way, where Welcome to Raccoon City is based on Resident Evil, but it's not treating it like Bible truth. Yeah,
and like it probably could have stood. I actually haven't read The Shining, but it probably could have stood. I'm sure the film The Shining does a lot less sort of like a fan service, where it's like, here's a thing from the book just to have a thing from the book that doesn't pay off in any way.
So this is one of those movies you can go down rabbit holes.
Right.
The Shining. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining.
Yeah.
There's a scene when Dick Halloran is making his way back to Colorado after he got the Shining message from Danny, like, I need help. And while Dick Halloran's driving back to the Overlook Hotel, there's I forget the color of the vehicle, but the correct color of the vehicle that Torrance family drove to the Overlook in the book, you see it crushed by a semi truck or something along those lines. And people want to say that that's Kubrick saying like, this is not the book. This is its own thing, because they drive a very specifically different colored car. Weird stuff that that somehow proves that like JFK was gay or something. I don't remember specifically.
But like either way, I think it's like the point I'm getting at is like, when a guy like Kubrick makes a movie like that, I don't feel that same sense of the world's worst fan was just off camera going, "You better include this," you know,
Right.
like I do with this movie.
No, there's
Which
far less hornets in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. There's a lot. There's a lot about hornets' nests in the book.
yeah.
What are
Uh,
we talking about?
I don't know. This movie. I don't have much else to say. So if you got a list of things we need to still hit, have at it.
Well, I think I've like aired my major grievances, and I've tried to give praise where it is because I again like I have watched this movie a lot. I choose to spend my free time putting this on because it's a comfortable little world that I have inhabited for more than half of my life, and like something based in the Resident Evil oeuvre is is fine by me if it treats the source material with respect, just because I've spent even more time playing those games than I have watching these movies.
Mhm.
That, like, you know, I'm a very much a dedicated fan to the early Resident Evil series. And I've actually been won back with the more recent games. Like 7 and 8 were both very unique experiences. 7 much stronger and higher in my favor. 8 was its own strange. It was almost a fairy tale more than a video game, but that's its own thing.
Mhm.
Um, I dislike what this universe says about some very important aspects of Resident Evil. Again, with this, they want the direct sequel to be a Code Veronica sequel, but it's a lot of it just need. They can make it work if they have the resources and the right people on the set. Wink,
Mhm.
wink. I'm available, Johannes. But I want these like a movie like this. The fact that it doesn't set any room for a Resident Evil nemesis is, I think, its biggest problem. Just that it kind of glaringly omits like a mainline sequel while giving favor to a more offshootish sequel, which is Code Veronica. Um, we could go down a whole rabbit hole about like the way that different titles got the numbers in the series, but the other like side titles are just as important to the timeline. But in terms of like, this is just taking it's a mouthful of jelly beans, and they threw in some popcorn. But I think there's also some Ebola virus in this. So
Yeah.
I would recommend it. I would also like uh I would like a sequel in this same series. I'd be fine with that. I'd be happy if that was announced. I don't think it's going to happen. Again, I just read on the 24th, just about a week ago, I read that a new reboot is already in the works. But that's always the case. I don't trust any headlines that
As
don't come
in,
from major organizations.
wait, like
Another film reboot is in the works.
from the same like director and
A
studio as
different
this?
director is going to do it.
Why
And
not?
I think if they might be doing what I'm asking for, they might
Yeah.
just be focusing on the events of Resident Evil 1.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I'm not a fortune teller.
Yeah, I'm just kind of ready for a new idea.
Oh, you can't make money on that.
Only just because you mentioned a like I don't know, there's something very demoralizing to me about something like this where it's like, let's do a reboot, and it, for the budget they had financially on paper, I don't know, almost $20 million of profit seems pretty good.
I know, but Capcom is used to printing money.
Like, and then be like, well, we got to reboot it again. I don't know. I don't personally care about like any of the stuff you were talking about of like, oh, does it set up for this or that?
Of course.
If you made another one and cleaned up a lot of the stuff that I did not like, maybe yeah, I might be interested. Overall, it's like in the last uh like movie episode we did, I was like turning the wheels of what is my journey through adaptations, because I don't have attachment to them the way you do. That like I'm trying to like understand what could make one good, right? And I think from this, it's like I learned another it's like another layer of what I don't like in them. It's
Sure.
kind of what I learned from this experience.
That's how you can establish your taste, is knowing what you don't like helps you kind of refine what you do like.
Is I think, like, because I mean, my issue before it was too much fan service, and this is like, it's still too much fan service, but it's like, I don't know, there was something different about it being in like a studio multi-million-dollar production versus that $50,000 movie
Sure.
that was like another layer of it. Like, I think maybe this is the first one we've watched that is a lot of fan service coming directly from a major studio, or like, Hollywood level film production.
Sure.
And I'm like, okay, that doesn't work for me either. It's kind of what I just learned from watching it.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to adapt a video game into a good movie. I think that's what we're learning more and more here at Camp Video Games. It's hard. It's hard to, and you'll never, ever, ever please everybody. So remember that, campers.
I mean, I don't know. I have some ideas of what I do like. I liked a sort of like, oh, let's expand the world with the people who actually made the game into this sort of anime, whatever. Like Advent Children is kind of fun in that regard. I don't think it's a great movie, but like, I think stylistically that's a direction to go that I could find interesting, is like a sequel, similar graphic style. I don't know. There's something about that I'm like, okay, there's something there. But we'll I don't know. We'll see as we march on.
Well, I mean, just to like kind of close on this thought, like the idea of Advent Children, as a film sequel to a video game made by the game makers, that's a pretty unique opportunity for both sides.
I don't know how much of that's out there, but I think I just wanted to throw out something of like, I don't hate all of any game adaptation. It's just like, I'm finding more and more what does and doesn't work for me.
There's still so many IPs for us to discover as we discover what's the best product for enjoyment as consumer.
There sure are. I don't know. I don't know. That was all my feelings on Welcome to Raccoon City. Not gonna get a rewatch from me anytime soon.
I will wait another year to watch it again. Probably. I watched it twice this week.
Yeah. We talked about this over text, the idea of like going out on maybe like what are we consuming right now, or what are we recommending right now? We could do that, or we could not do that.
Oh, I've got something.
Make the call in real time. Why not?
I have been playing Solar Jetman on the Nintendo Switch NES Online little library that they offer. Solar Jetman is you play as a little spaceman in a space pod, and it's all about the gravity of each level that you visit, and you're fighting gravity. It controls like asteroids, just you've got a ship that can spin and go in a single direction, whatever way you're pointing. But every level has very different gravities, so it's more thrusters needed, or you're gonna fall way quicker. It's a fun exploration game that I have not gotten that far into. I've probably played like 2 or 3 hours of it, but it's a lot of fun in terms of exploration in an 8-bit map that has pretty fluid physics, and it's gotten some laughs out of me that I didn't expect. Solar Jetman
game.
It's fun. You've got it available on your Nintendo Switch expansion pass. Or I guess anybody with a Switch could play that one.
I think you got to have at least like the $25 a year level.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, for the access to the Switch Online
I'm
stuff.
Starting to wonder how worth that expansion pass is to me. I'll still pay for it if they promise to release new games. Like, I thought there was going to be new games every month, and that is not the case.
Yeah, the last batch they released, there was an update to the Super Nintendo, and they do this weird thing where they'll have like one just dog shit game that was released in America. Like this time it was like whatever Battletoads game came out on Super Nintendo.
Oh, Battletoads and Double Dragon.
Yeah. Well, and then they released it alongside 2 like Japanese games that they did not translate.
They've done that several times across all the different systems, and it's maddening.
Which could be fine if it's something like I think I've played an untranslated copy of like Pocky and Rocky, which is like a really fun shmup. Is that what they call them? Like, or bullet hell game?
Sure. Where you're like usually a spaceship or something.
Yeah, but you're like these two cute little characters.
Okay.
And that's a game where you can just like hit start and play and you get it.
Yeah.
But I tried playing the ones they released last month, and there was one that like I just menued through 10 layers of stuff, all just walls of Japanese text, to eventually get to some gameplay. And I think it's a dodgeball game where you do like hyper management of your dodgeball team. And I was like, this seems like a really cool game, but I have no idea what's going on. And I'm not going to play it. It's so bizarre to release that to American audience.
That was made by the same people that made River City Ransom.
It has the same graphics style.
Yeah.
It looks cool as hell.
I love River City Ransom. That was such a fun co-op fighting game. Like I
with like RPG elements.
Yeah. You would eat different menu items, and that would increase your strength or your skill sets. We should play that.
It's like a proto Yakuza in a way.
Interesting.
Like where it's like you're just going, you can go back and forth through this neighborhood and sort of poke your way through the story. Anyways,
every time you beat somebody up, they barf.
Yeah. But that dodgeball game looks sick. It's just like, why did you release it without translating it? Like
there's fan translations for it.
You could probably count, on one hand, the number of people who played it as far as I did.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It's like, what are they doing?
No, they're like, Nintendo, you need to localize your offerings to an English speaking audience. Like, I don't know how. I mean,
it's so weird.
It's weird.
Anyways,
so that's me, Solar Jet Man. It's been a fun. It's an easy game to pick up, and it has a lot of charm to it.
I want to do one like quick thing because I talked to you at length before we started recording about my experience. I just rewatched Apocalypse Now for the first time since I honestly, like, the redo or Redux version might not have even been out yet when I first saw it. I just watched Apocalypse Now Redux yesterday for the first time since I was a teenager. And one, it's the best war movie that will ever be made. There will never be a better war film than this. Like, you watch this movie, you go, we need to end all war forever. But the thing that I think is really interesting for this podcast is watch that movie and think about a Metal Gear Solid game.
Oh, absolutely.
It is so heavily influenced for like the pacing of the story of like what Hideo Kojima did in the Metal Gear Solid games, where it's like this descent into a world, and then like the final act is just all this just chaos just being dumped on you of like, what's going on? What the fuck is this? Like
Colonel Kurtz's big boss.
Yeah. It's very much like Metal Gear Solid 3. Well, Metal Gear Solid 3 is very much like this. Yeah. I like 2 better, but
interesting.
Yeah.
3 is one of my favorite all-timers.
Yeah. So there's that, and otherwise, I've been cheering myself up with Dragon Quest XI. Is fantastic. It's like you can just, especially because like I just haven't had a lot of time to play games outside of what we've been doing for the show lately. It's been time and interest. Like there's just been nothing coming out since Shadow of the Erdtree like 4 or 5 months ago that's compelled me in any way. I've tried a few new games. I'm like, whatever. So I've been playing Dragon Quest XI. It's nice. You can pick it up. It's like, I could play like 1 or 2 episodes of like a shonen anime and then put it down. And then the great thing is you come back to it a week later, you fire it up, and it's like, here's the story so far.
Love when games do that.
Yeah. And it like reminds you what's going on. It's very perfect for anybody who's feeling this. Like, I'm just in between games. I'm only playing an hour or 2 a week. But I don't know. This Metaphor Re Fantasio demo just came out. I'm gonna bite into that. It's looks bonkers. It's by the people who make the Persona series, and I never played any Persona, so I feel like they're inviting me in. Of like, look, here's just a whole new franchise.
Sure.
For somebody who's been like, that looks interesting, but I don't know if I want to invest 100 hours into something that like has a like style, a feel, an aesthetic to it that's 5 games deep, you know? So I'm going to bite into that probably tonight. I don't know. And I just need something new to hook me. Because also the new Zelda just came out as we're recording this. Probably a month.
Echoes of Wisdom.
Yeah, probably a month before we publish this, but that it was like between these 2 games is like that Zelda game looks fantastic. I'll enjoy it, but it's like I know what I'm getting is what the vibe I get. Whereas this, I'm like, I don't know, maybe it'll just introduce me to something that'll blow my mind.
I wonder what the future of Zelda gaming is going to be, because like I feel Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom were a very special like
Yeah.
like segment for Nintendo, where it's like they built so much hype around these games that I don't see that happening again with the series.
Yeah, Echoes of Wisdom, from everything I've seen so far, feels like it's the attempt to blend Super Nintendo era Link to the Past with the modern Zelda.
Mm-hmm.
Like the freedom of the modern Zelda.
You know what really got me, and if you want to listen to us really talk about modern Zelda, give a listen to our full series
the
on
early
Breath of
days.
the Wild. Yeah, that's season 1 Camp Video Games. But it was just the amount of storytelling that they kind of hint at throughout, that you don't get the full story on these things, but there's so much that you can just kind of interpret and then run with. And it's the old feeling of just like being a kid playing a game and then filling in the blanks. But Nintendo did so much work to give you those blanks that need filling that it became so compelling. I just don't see that happening again with Zelda, especially as they're now kind of distancing themselves from the big kid version of Zelda, where it's like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, like that's the most sophisticated Zelda has ever been. And now they're like, and now back to basics.
Yeah.
With a little flourish.
It's funny you mentioned that, because like the other thing with that game is it has the art style of 2019's Link's Awakening remaster, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's so childish that I'm like, it feels silly to play this game not with my girlfriend's 8-year-old. You know? Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
I don't play with baby toys.
I actually mentioned that to her the other day. She's like, "Nah, don't wait for her. If you're gonna like something, just play it."
Yeah.
I was like, "All right," but I'll probably end up rewatching her play it in a year or two. I don't know. Anyways, that's what we've been up to.
Thus concludes our palate cleanser segment.
Yeah, we got to call that the palate cleanser. So, we'll be back with more and probably a little less horror-inducing content.
Do you remember what we said we're going to talk about next?
I do. We hadn't 100% committed, but we can right now if you want.
Da 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 da.
Yeah. Until then, we'll talk to you soon, campers.
Yeah. If you need a snack, go to the woods. There's berries there.
Yeah, I'm sorry for what I did with that. It seemed like a good idea at the time.
Light it up, baby!
Delfino Plaza. Just, let's light it up. Let's light it up like a set from Apocalypse Now. Till next time.
Goodbye, campers.
If you'd like to write to us, send a message to campvideogames@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram @campvideogames. If you want to become a real happy camper, you can support Camp Video Games on Patreon. For $5 a month, you'll be granted access to even more discussions about movie-based video games, game-based movies, full-length commentaries, playthroughs, and more. Whether you sign up or not, we're glad to have you here at Camp Video Games.